Just 6 weeks after Spurs broke the British transfer record for Paul Gascoigne, Everton broke it again, paying West Ham United £2.3 million for striker Tony Cottee. Cottee had been a prolific striker for the Hammers, racking up 92 goals in 212 appearances at the age of just 22, and the Everton fans would be hoping he could replicate that form for them after a somewhat disappointing 1987-88 season, which had seen them only finish 4th after 3 successive seasons in the top 2. Also in the UK, the new Education Reform Act came into force with the end of the academic year. The largest shake-up in education in England, Wales and Northern Ireland since World War II, education is one of those areas where Scotland does its own thing, saw schools being now able to opt out of local authority control. League tables of exam results would now be published as part of the new push to allow parents to choose their child's school rather than having it just assigned to them. And in higher education, tenure was abolished, though not taken away from those who already had it, and there was a tightening up on the use of the word degree by institutions. Over in New York, Tompkins Square Park in Manhattan, in the district known as Alphabet City, part of the East Village, had in recent years become known as a rather insalubrious area full of, to quote one source, drug pushers, homeless people and young people known as squatters and punks. Locals were divided on the issue. Some felt unsafe and wanted the authorities to act, others disagreed with what they saw as creeping gentrification. The Parks Department were prevailed upon to impose a 1 a.m. curfew on the park, which led to protests. On the weekend of the Hungarian Grand Prix, one of these protests was charged by police, resulting in ongoing battles all night that caught up bystanders, local residents and journalists, along with the police and protesters. Over 100 complaints of police brutality were lodged in the aftermath, and both sides of the debate among the locals were united in condemning the heavy-handed actions of the police. The commander in charge was deprived of office for a year, and the NYPD were later commended for their honesty in admitting that the event had been a police riot. And in France, ground was broken on a new site at Marne-la-Vallée near Paris for what would become known as Euro Disneyland, the second Disney park outside the US, following the success of Tokyo Disney Resort, opened in 1983. The new resort would include some 5,800 hotel rooms, a Frank Gehry-designed entertainment, shopping and dining complex, and menus tweaked to adjust traditional Disney fare for European tastes and food regulations. It was estimated that some 68 million people lived within a 4-hour drive, and a further 300 million within a 2-hour flight of the new park, which was slated to open in 1991. And the F1 teams headed for Hungary, for the race that pundits were saying would be the best chance the atmospheric cars would have all season to get one over on the turbos, with handling and acceleration being much more important on the twisty circuit than pure power, especially when that power was delayed by a turbo lag. McLaren were trying out ceramic impellers on their turbo units, which should reduce the lag, and there were a few other changes in cars, most notably the March team, who had a new double-deck front wing, and Minardi, who had new front suspension, in an effort to combat the understeer that the drivers had been complaining about all season. They only had one car ready for Sala, but Martini's should be converted by the time of the next race in Belgium. Ligier had a second lightweight chassis available for Johansson, who proclaimed it the best version of the car he'd driven all season and would hope to actually make the grid for a change. Personnel changes for 1989 were starting to take effect too, with Harvey Postlethwaite and his former Ferrari colleague Jean-Claude Michaud seen in the Tyrrell garage as the team celebrated their 250th Grand Prix, and Gustav Brunner had officially joined Zakspeed as rumoured. Nigel Mansell, meanwhile, would be racing against doctor's orders. He'd caught chickenpox from his son Leo and was suffering quite badly, feverish and dizzy outside the cockpit, but determined not to miss what he saw as his best chance to get a win this year. Nonetheless, he was looking distinctly haggard and unshaven, and had lost 7 pounds in 4 days, had to have a new hole drilled in his belt. Friday's free practice was conducted in pouring rain again, and Julian Bailey turned some heads by spending much of it at the top of the timing sheets, eventually ending up third behind Mansell and Nannini, but the race had stopped in time for pre-qualifying, which saw Lorini's Azella eliminated 4 seconds adrift of Cafes de Lara. By the time the afternoon qualifying session began, the track was beginning to dry, and although Prost was fastest, he was followed by Nannini, Mansell and Patrese, with Senna back in 5th after a spin, and Piquet all the way back in 22nd. Saturday was dry though, and everybody improved their times, in particular Senna, who took his 8th pole of the year, 4 tenths faster than Mansell's 1987 pole time set with a 4-bar boost. Nigel himself, meanwhile, had pushed Senna all the way and would line up on the front row, just a tenth behind the McLaren, with Thierry Boutsen an excellent third and Capelli a very excellent fourth, and it could have been even higher if he hadn't accidentally switched off his engine management computer 2 corners from the end of his best lap. The turquoise march lined up ahead of Nannini and Prix on row 3, with Prost back in 7th alongside the other march of Gugelmin. The Ferraris were having another appalling weekend, with Berger 9th and Alboreto 15th, both seeming somewhat resigned to their fate at this point, with Caffi 10th and Sala 11th, both great performances in their little Italian independence. And they were ahead of the turbos of Warwick, Piquet, Cheever and Alboreto. Dalmas qualified 17th in the spare Lola after having had a huge accident with Larrauri on Saturday and rolled over. De Cesaris overcame more car troubles to put the Real 18th. Tarquini was delighted to make the grid in 22nd, Johansson and Arnoux would both race in the Ligiers, and Modena brought up the rear, leaving Larrauri, both Zach Speeds, and poor Julian Bailey watching from the sidelines. The second Tyrrell driver had broken his crown wheel and pinion and had to qualify in Palmer's car, which didn't really suit him. Mansell had looked shattered after qualifying, which didn't bode well for the 76-lap race, especially when Sunday dawned clear and sunny, with temperatures of 27 degrees 80 Fahrenheit. When the green lights went on, thank you ESPN for the helpful caption, Mansell got away really well and looked like he'd take the lead, only for Senna's power to tell and the Williams slotted in the second. His teammate Prix, though, had got off the line like a scalded cat and gone from 6th to 3rd by the first turn. Mansell was still glued to the back of Senna's car when they came round to finish the lap, with Prix just behind and ahead of the 2 Benettons and Berger, while Prost had gotten away tardily and dropped back to 9th, recovering 8th from Gugelmin as they crossed the line. Sala had hit Dalmas on the opening lap and came in for a new nose and front wheel, and he was followed in the next lap by Capelli, who was having some engine problems. He said it was his engine management computer still not right, others thought he'd just over-revved in his enthusiasm off the line. Prost was soon on Berger's tail as Palmer became the first retirement, so not a great 250th race for Uncle Ken's boys with a dead engine, and Capelli soon came in to retire to make it 2. Back on the track there were 2 great battles going on in the early stages, with Mansell firmly stuck to Senna's gearbox and Prost trying to find a way past Berger and into the points, but Berger had set fastest lap in his efforts to keep the McLaren behind him, enjoying being the one in front for a change at this circuit where passing was so difficult. Off-camera, Piquet rear-ended Martini in the midfield, putting the Minardi out on the spot, while a Lotus toured round slowly to have a new nose and tyres put on. Meanwhile, on the same lap, a coming together between Nakajima and Straff had sent the Frenchman in for repairs too. Senna was still ahead, doing just about enough to keep ahead of Mansell, who looked like he would like to be going much quicker, while Prost had made his way past Berger off-camera and was now sighting up on Nannini in 5th place. Whether losing downforce behind Senna, losing concentration due to illness, or some other reason, Mansell just put a wheel wrong on lap 12 and pirouetted gracefully, dropping behind Prix and Boutsen in the process, and now had Prost right on his tail, having already disposed of Nannini. In fact, Nannini's Ford engine was starting to misfire a bit, and he soon lost another place to Berger. So it was Prix who took up the chase of Senna, who'd now opened up a lead of just over 2 seconds, and indeed Ricciardo had to worry a little bit more about Boutsen and his mirrors than he did in closing the gap to the leader, though Senna seemed in no hurry, and Prix did start to close up as Johansson's throttle stuck open, sending him bouncing across the grass and out of the race. As Senna approached Piquet to lap him after his pit stop, the top 5 were still close together, with Boutsen harrying Prix and Prost harrying Mansell as they began lap 22, at which point Caffi pulled off with a dead engine, having been running a very creditable 9th since the start. By the time Senna was up behind the Lotus, he had Prix, Boutsen and Mansell right behind, while Prost had dropped back a little and seemed to be awaiting developments. Senna quickly disposed of Piquet, but then got stuck behind Martini in the infield, allowing Prix to close up once more. Senna was doing his usual trick of carving aggressively through the traffic as Prost moved up ahead of Mansell as the top 5 all passed Modena. Prix, however, was starting to have a misfire on his Judd engine, and he was dropping back, while another Judd in the back of Arnoux' Ligier let go entirely. By the halfway point, then, Senna led Boutsen and Prost, and the 2 McLarens were trading fastest laps, while Prix' stuttering Williams had dropped back to 6th behind Mansell and Berger. The Austrian passed the Brit off-camera, and Mansell made the decision on lap 38 to come in and change his tyres, having actually flat-spotted them when he spun and been putting up with the vibrations ever since. He returned to the track 7th and set off once more in pursuit of the points. On lap 41, Senna came up to lap Cheever, and by now Boutsen was right on his rear wing, with Prost just a couple of car lengths behind. The leader was still not going anywhere near as fast as he could be, using all the track to keep the Benetton behind him, while Prost would be just looking for an opportunity. But with his title rival now within a couple of seconds, Senna now did speed up, putting some fresh air between himself and the Belgian. And just as well, because on lap 47 Prost powered past Boutsen on the straight, and it was the McLaren's first and second once again. As they came through traffic 2 laps later, Senna was just about to lap Tarquini and Dalmas when Prost lunged for the lead at turn 1, but he was offline going into the corner, allowing Senna to come back through. As the entire McLaren team unclenched, it was back to the drawing board for the Professor. Prost set another fastest lap, now just half a second off Piquet's 1986 record, and was still stuck firmly to Senna's back end. It was certainly cracking stuff, and some of the best racing we'd seen all year, and Boutsen was still there just behind them, waiting to pick up the pieces if they collided. Mansell had made it past Gugelmin into 5th, but the March was still sticking with him and hanging on well, both of them of course using the same Judd engine. Prost stayed firmly attached to the back of Senna until, with 18 laps to go, one of his wheel nuts started working loose, and the vibrations, and risk of losing a wheel entirely, forced him to back off, as Mansell came in for a second tyre change on lap 60, only to come straight back in and retire, utterly exhausted. Prost was clearly struggling by now, but fortunately for him, Boutsen had cracked his exhaust pipe and dropped off even further, so it was left for Senna to cruise home for the win. But wait! As the leaders entered the last lap, Prost was suddenly right on Senna's gearbox again. Was Ayrton in fuel trouble? Had he just backed off too much? Was there something wrong with his car? Or had Prost just decided to make one last all-or-nothing gung-ho charge? He pushed Senna all the way to the line but couldn't quite make it stick, and it was another McLaren 1-2, the two Marlboro cars just half a second apart at the flag, with Boutsen trailing in some 30 seconds adrift. Berger was 4th and the last unlapped driver, with Gugelmin taking 2 points for March and Patrese salvaging 1 for Williams. Nakajima led his illustrious teammate Piquet home 7th and 8th, and Dalmas overcame his horror crash on Saturday and his early accident today to come in 9th in the spare Lola. To look at the result on its own, you'd never know that it had been one of the closest and most exciting races of the season so far, but as the dust settled, all that really mattered were the points tallies, with Senna now drawing level with Prost on points, and ahead on race wins by 6-4. Boutsen moved up to equal Piquet on points, March edged ahead of Williams in the Constructors' standings, and McLaren, meanwhile, could actually win the Constructors' Championship at the next race. They now led Ferrari by 88 points, with 90 still on offer.